Imagine it's night, a warm, still night on the coast of ancient Greece. The stars hang low and bright above the Aegean Sea, and somewhere in the distance you can hear the gentle rhythm of waves folding over smooth stone. The air smells of pine resin and wild thyme. Somewhere an owl calls softly from the branches of an old olive tree. This is a world without streetlights, without screens, without the hum of electricity. When darkness falls here, it falls completely, and the only lights are the stars above and the occasional flicker of an oil lamp in a distant window. And yet, even in this ancient darkness, people struggled to sleep. Just like you might be struggling right now. Just like millions of people have struggled every single night for thousands and thousands of years. But here, on this quiet coast, something remarkable happened. The ancient Greeks didn't just accept sleeplessness. They didn't just toss and turn and stare at the ceiling, or in their case, the rough wooden beams of their homes. They did something extraordinary. They built temples, not temples for war gods or thunder gods, temples for sleep itself. They believed that sleep could heal, that dreams carried messages from the divine, that if you prepared your body and your mind in just the right way and then lay down in a sacred place, the god of medicine himself would visit you in the night and make you whole again. This is the story of those temples, the story of how the ancient Greeks turned sleep into medicine, and why, 2,000 years later, modern science is discovering they were far more right than anyone imagined. So settle in, get comfortable, let the world outside grow quiet, and let me take you back to a time when healing began with closing your eyes. There is something ancient about the act of lying awake in the dark, something that connects you to every human who has ever lived, every person who has ever lain on their back and listened to the sounds of the night, waiting for sleep to come. In the modern world, we have a name for it. We call it insomnia. We treat it as a disorder, something to be fixed with pills, with apps, with white noise machines and weighted blankets and blue light filters. And all of those things can help. But sometimes the best medicine for a restless mind isn't something new. It's something very, very old. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey. Not a fast journey. There's nothing fast about where we're going. We're going to travel slowly, gently, like a boat, drifting on a calm sea. We're going to visit a world that disappeared long ago, but left behind clues, carved in marble, buried in earth, written in the words of philosophers and physicians who lived more than 2,000 years before us. We're going to ancient Greece, to a time when gods walked among men, when illness was a mystery, and dreams were messages from the divine. When the most advanced medical science in the world was practiced not in laboratories or hospitals, but in sacred temples hidden among pine forests, beside healing springs, under skies that had never known the light of a single electric bulb. And at the center of this story is an idea so simple, so profound, that it might just be the oldest medical insight in human history. That sleep itself is medicine. That if you can create the right conditions, the right environment, the right state of mind, the right story to carry you into the dark, your body and your mind can heal themselves. The Greeks understood this. They didn't just believe it. They built an entire medical system around it, a system that lasted for nearly 1,000 years. A system whose echoes can still be heard in every hospital, every clinic, every sleep laboratory in the world today. So let me tell you about it. Let me tell you about the sleep temples, about the God who healed through dreams, about the patients who traveled hundreds of miles for a single night's rest, and about what modern science has discovered about why their ancient methods actually worked. But first, close your eyes if you like, or let them rest, half open, unfocused. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop. You don't need to do anything right now. You don't need to be anywhere. You just need to listen. And if, at some point during this story, you drift off to sleep, that's not a failure. That's exactly what the ancient Greeks would have wanted. To understand why the Greeks built sleep temples, we first need to understand how they saw the world, and specifically, how they saw illness. For us today, getting sick is usually a matter of biology, a virus, a bacterial infection, a genetic predisposition. We think in terms of cells and molecules and immune responses. But for the people of ancient Greece, illness was something far more personal, far more meaningful. If you fell ill in ancient Greece, it wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It was a message. The gods were trying to tell you something. Perhaps you had offended a deity. Perhaps you had broken a sacred law without realizing it. Perhaps the delicate balance between the human world and the divine world had been disturbed, and your body was paying the price. This might sound primitive to us, but think about it for a moment. In a world without microscopes, without any understanding of bacteria or viruses, what other explanation was there? You couldn't see germs. You couldn't understand why one person got sick and another didn't. The invisible forces that shaped health and disease needed an explanation, and the gods provided one. But the Greeks were not simply superstitious. They were, in fact, among the most curious and observant people in human history. And alongside their religious explanations for illness, they began developing something else entirely: the earliest forms of rational medicine. Greek physicians started watching. They noticed patterns. They noticed that certain herbs, when brewed into teas or applied as poultices, could reduce fevers. They observed that wounds healed faster when kept clean. They discovered that diet affected health, that what you ate and drank could make you well or make you sick. Most importantly, they developed a theory that would dominate Western medicine for nearly 2,000 years: the theory of the four humors. According to this theory, the human body contained four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When these four humors were in balance, you were healthy. When they fell out of balance, you became ill. The job of the physician, then, was to restore balance through diet, through exercise, through bloodletting or purging, through changing your environment, your habits, your daily rhythms. But here's what makes the Greeks truly fascinating. They didn't choose between religion and science. They held both ideas at the same time. A Greek person who fell ill might visit a physician for practical treatment, herbs, dietary advice, perhaps minor surgery, but they might also visit a temple to seek divine healing. And they saw no contradiction in this whatsoever. In fact, the most powerful healing happened when both approaches came together, when the practical wisdom of the physician merged with the spiritual power of the gods. And nowhere was this merger more complete, more sophisticated, and more successful than in the healing temples dedicated to one particular god. A god whose name you might not know, but whose symbol you see every single day on ambulances, on hospitals, on pharmacy signs around the world. His name was Asklepios, and his specialty was healing through sleep. Let me paint you a picture of what life was like for an ordinary person in ancient Greece. Not a king or a philosopher, just an ordinary person. A farmer, perhaps, or a merchant. Someone who worked hard, slept in a small house with a dirt floor, and worried about the same things that people have always worried about: food, family, safety, the future. When this person got sick, when they developed a persistent cough, or a fever that wouldn't break, or a pain in their side that grew worse each day, what did they do? First, they tried the things that everyone knew. Home remedies passed down through generations. A poultice of herbs applied to the forehead for a headache. A tea brewed from willow bark for pain. Honey and vinegar for a sore throat. Garlic for infections. These folk remedies were widespread, and many of them were genuinely effective. Willow bark, for example, contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin. If the folk remedies didn't work, and if the person could afford it, they might visit a physician. In ancient Greece, physicians were independent practitioners. They traveled from town to town, offering their services for a fee. There was no licensing, no formal medical training in the way we understand it. Some physicians were highly skilled. Others were little better than charlatans. A visit to a physician might result in a prescription, dietary changes, herbal preparations, exercise regimens. It might involve physical manipulation, massage, bone setting, or even crude surgery. Greek surgical instruments found by archaeologists include scalpels, forceps, probes, catheters, and even a device for drilling into the skull, a practice called trepanation, which was believed to release evil spirits or relieve pressure. But here's the reality that defined medicine in the ancient world. For many conditions, there was simply nothing a physician could do. Cancer, tuberculosis, severe infections, autoimmune diseases, neurological conditions. These were death sentences. The physician would shake his head, collect his fee, and move on to the next town. And so the patient, having exhausted the options of folk medicine and professional medicine, would turn to the third option. The option that, for many Greeks, was actually the first choice all along. They would turn to the gods. The relationship between Greeks and their gods was not like the relationship between modern believers and their deity. Greek gods were not distant, abstract entities. They were present. They were active. They had personalities, preferences, moods, and grudges. They intervened directly in human affairs, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, often for reasons that seemed arbitrary or even petty. If you wanted a god's help, you had to approach them correctly. You had to make the right offerings at the right time, in the right place. You had to purify yourself. You had to show proper respect, and you had to believe. Sincerity mattered to the gods. For healing, the most powerful god to approach was Asklepios, and the most powerful way to seek his help was to visit one of his temples, an Asklepios, and undergo the sacred ritual of healing sleep. But before we talk about Asklepios, I want you to appreciate something about the Greek approach to illness. Because for all its supernatural trappings, it contained a seed of wisdom that modern medicine sometimes forgets. The Greeks treated illness as something meaningful, something that connected you to the larger order of the universe. When you were sick, you weren't just a broken machine that needed fixing. You were a person who had fallen out of harmony with your body, with your community, with the divine. And healing meant restoring that harmony on every level. this might sound like mysticism, but consider how many modern illnesses are caused or worsened by stress, by social isolation, by a sense of meaninglessness or disconnection. Consider how many patients feel that modern medicine treats their bodies but ignores their souls. Consider the growing movement toward holistic health, integrative medicine, mind-body practices. The ancient Greeks might not have had antibiotics or MRI machines, but they understood something that we are still, in many ways, struggling to learn: that a human being is not just a body, and that true healing must address the whole person. With that understanding in mind, let me introduce you to Asklepios, the god of medicine, the healer in dreams, the son of Apollo, and the patron of the most extraordinary healing institutions the ancient world ever created. Asklepios was not like the other gods of Olympus. He wasn't a god of war, like Ares. He wasn't a god of the sea, like Poseidon. He wasn't even really a god at all. At least, not at first. He was something more interesting. He was a mortal who became divine through the sheer power of his healing gift. According to legend, Asklepios was the son of Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy, and a mortal woman named Coronis. The story of his birth is dramatic, as Greek myths tend to be. When Apollo discovered that Coronis had been unfaithful, he killed her. But as her body lay on the funeral pyre, Apollo felt a pang of regret, or perhaps love, and he rescued the unborn child from her womb. That child was Asklepios. Apollo entrusted the boy to Chiron, the wise centaur, half man, half horse, who lived in the caves of Mount Pelion. Chiron was the greatest teacher in the Greek world. He had educated Achilles, Jason, and many other heroes. But with Asklepios, he found his most gifted student. Chiron taught the boy everything he knew about the healing arts, the properties of herbs and plants, the art of setting broken bones, the technique of cutting into flesh to remove disease, what we would call surgery, the secrets of potions and poultices and medicinal baths. Asklepios learned quickly, incredibly quickly. He didn't just master the skills Chiron taught him, he surpassed them. He developed new techniques, he discovered new remedies. He became so skilled at healing that people began traveling from across the Greek world just to be treated by him. And then he crossed a line. Asklepios became so powerful that he could raise the dead. He brought back to life men who had already crossed into the underworld. And this terrified Zeus, the king of the gods. If humans could conquer death, what need would they have for the gods? The natural order of the world, the boundary between mortal and immortal, was being threatened. So Zeus did what Zeus often did when he felt threatened. He struck Asklepios down with a thunderbolt, but the story doesn't end there. It never does with the Greeks. After his death, the people refused to forget Asklepios. They honored him, they worshipped him, and over time he was elevated from mortal healer to divine god of medicine. Temples were built in his name across the entire Greek world. Not just a few temples, over 300 of them, from mainland Greece to the islands, from Asia Minor to North Africa, from Sicily to the shores of the Black Sea. These temples were called Asklepios, and they were unlike any religious site that had come before. You see, most Greek temples were places you went to pray. You made an offering, you said your words, and you went home. But the Asklepios were different. They were places you went to stay, to be treated, to be healed. They were, in every meaningful sense, the first hospitals in human history. And at the center of every Asklepios was a practice so unusual, so specific, and so powerful that it defined the entire institution. The practice of sleeping in a sacred place, in the hope that the god would visit you in your dreams and cure your disease. The Greeks had a word for this practice. They called it enkoimesis, the sacred sleep. And to understand how it worked, we need to travel to the most famous Asklepios of them all, a place called Epidaurus. But before we go there, let me tell you about the symbol of Asklepios, because you've seen it. You've seen it your entire life, probably without knowing where it came from. It's a serpent, coiled around a staff, a single snake winding its way up a rough wooden rod. This is the rod of Asklepios, and it remains the universal symbol of medicine to this day. You'll find it on the emblems of medical associations around the world, on the sides of ambulances, on the walls of hospitals and clinics. Why a snake? The Greeks believed that snakes were connected to healing and renewal. A snake sheds its skin and emerges fresh and new, a perfect metaphor for recovery from illness. Snakes were also considered sacred to Asklepios. They lived in his temples. They slithered freely across the floors of the healing halls. And as we'll discover later, they played a very specific role in the healing rituals that took place there. Asklepios was also accompanied by a dog, a loyal companion who, according to legend, could heal the sick by licking their wounds. This isn't as strange as it sounds. Modern science has shown that dog saliva does contain certain antibacterial compounds. The Greeks, as we'll keep discovering, had an uncanny instinct for things that science would only confirm millennia later. Now let's travel to Epidaurus, to the greatest healing sanctuary the ancient world ever built. But let me tell you more about the world that Asklepios inhabited, the world of Greek mythology and religion. Because to truly understand the power of the sleep temples, you need to understand the mindset of the people who used them. The Greek gods were not abstract concepts. They were personalities. They had stories. They fought with each other, fell in love, held grudges, played favorites. Zeus was powerful, but unfaithful. Hera was proud and vengeful. Athena was wise but fierce. Hermes was clever and mischievous. Among this colorful, quarrelsome pantheon, Asklepios occupied a unique position. He was not one of the 12 Olympians. He was not a god of cosmic forces like thunder or the sea. He was something humbler and in some ways more powerful. He was a god of compassion, a god who understood suffering because he had once been mortal himself. This mattered deeply to the people who sought his help. When you prayed to Zeus, you were petitioning a king, distant, powerful, potentially indifferent. But when you prayed to Asklepios, you were speaking to someone who had once been human, someone who knew what it felt like to have a body that could break, a heart that could ache, a life that could end. The myths surrounding Asklepios reinforced this connection. There were stories of him weeping over patients he couldn't save, stories of him arguing with the other gods on behalf of suffering mortals, stories of his gentle hands, his soft voice, his infinite patience. For a sick person, desperate and afraid, these stories mattered. They made the god feel accessible, personal, real. You weren't just throwing your prayers into the void and hoping something stuck. You were reaching out to a being who, the stories said, genuinely cared about your pain. And this emotional connection, this sense of being seen, being heard, being cared about, was itself a form of medicine. We know now that feelings of social connection and emotional support have measurable effects on health outcomes. Patients who feel cared for recover faster, experience less pain, and have stronger immune responses than patients who feel ignored or abandoned. The cult of Asklepios provided exactly this: the deep, sustaining belief that someone powerful, someone wise, someone kind, was paying attention to your suffering and wanted to help. Now Asklepios didn't work alone. He had a family, and each member played a role in the healing arts. His wife, Epione, was the goddess of soothing pain. His daughter Hygieia was the goddess of health and prevention. Her name gives us the word hygiene. Another daughter, Panacea, was the goddess of universal remedy. Her name means cure-all, and it persists in English today. His sons, Machaon and Podalerios, were skilled surgeons who served in the Trojan War. This divine family represented a complete philosophy of medicine: prevention through Hygieia, treatment through Asklepios, surgery through his sons, pain management through Epione, universal care through Panacea. It was a remarkably comprehensive vision of healthcare, one that modern medicine, with its tendency towards specialization and fragmentation, sometimes struggles to match. The temples built to this family, the Asklepios, reflected this comprehensive approach. They were not single-purpose institutions. They were holistic healing centers, designed to address every dimension of human well-being: physical, emotional, spiritual, social, the body, the mind, the soul. And they were extraordinarily successful. For nearly 1,000 years, from roughly 500 BC to 500 AD, the Asklepios operated across the Mediterranean world. They survived the rise of Athens, the conquests of Alexander the Great, the expansion of Rome, and the spread of Christianity. They outlasted empires and philosophies and wars, and throughout it all, they continued to attract patients, thousands and thousands of patients from every level of society, seeking one thing: a night of healing sleep. Let me take you now to the most famous of these temples, a place that, even in ruins, still radiates an extraordinary sense of peace. The Peloponnese Peninsula in southern Greece is a land of rugged mountains, deep valleys, and ancient olive groves. The air here is warm and dry, scented with oregano and sage, and nestled in a gentle valley, surrounded by pine forests and rolling hills, lies the sanctuary of Epidaurus. When you first approach Epidaurus, even today, you feel something change. The noise of the world seems to fall away. The pine trees close in around you, and the air becomes cooler, sweeter, filled with the sharp green scent of resin. There's a stillness here that feels intentional, as if the landscape itself was designed for healing. And in a way, it was. Epidaurus was not simply a temple. It was an entire complex, a sprawling campus of buildings, gardens, and sacred spaces, all dedicated to one purpose: restoring health to the sick. Think of it as an ancient wellness resort, a healing university, and a spiritual retreat center, all rolled into one. Let me walk you through it. At the heart of the sanctuary stood the great temple of Asklepios itself, a magnificent marble structure with elegant columns and intricate carvings. Inside was a chryselephantine statue of the god, made of gold and ivory, seated on a throne, one hand resting on the head of a serpent, the other holding a staff. Visitors would come here first to pay their respects, to make offerings, and to pray for healing. But the temple was just the beginning. Surrounding it were the facilities that made Epidaurus unique. There were bathhouses, Large, well-designed structures where patients could bathe in warm or cold water, soak in mineral springs, and cleanse themselves both physically and spiritually. Bathing was considered an essential part of the healing process. It relaxed the muscles, opened the pores, and prepared the body for what was to come. There was a gymnasium, not the kind we think of today, with machines and weights, but an open area where patients could exercise, walk, and stretch under the guidance of trainers. The Greeks believed firmly that physical activity was essential to health. A body that moved was a body that healed. There was a stadium, a long flat track where athletic competitions were held. These weren't just entertainment, they were therapeutic. Watching athletes compete, feeling the excitement and the communal energy of the crowd was believed to stimulate the spirit and aid recovery. And then there was the theater. The great theater of Epidaurus, which still stands today, is one of the most remarkable structures of the ancient world. Carved into the hillside, it could seat 14,000 people, and its acoustics are legendary. Even today, if you stand at the very top row, 55 rows up from the stage, you can hear a coin being dropped on the stone floor at the center. A whisper on the stage carries to the furthest seat. The theater was used for performances of drama, poetry, and music. The Greeks understood something that modern medicine is only now beginning to fully appreciate: that art heals, that watching a story unfold, feeling emotions through characters, laughing, crying, being moved, all of this contributes to psychological and physical well-being. There was also a library where medical texts and philosophical works were kept. Guest quarters where patients could stay during their treatment, which often lasted several days. Gardens and sacred groves where patients walked in peaceful contemplation. And a structure called the Tholos, a mysterious circular building whose exact purpose is still debated by archaeologists, but which may have housed the sacred snakes of Asklepios. Everything at Epidaurus was carefully considered. The layout of the buildings, the orientation toward the sun, the flow of air through the valley, the views of the surrounding mountains and forests. Every detail was designed to create an environment of peace, beauty, and calm. And at the heart of it all, the building that everything else led toward, was a long, narrow structure called the Abaton. The Abaton, the word means the inaccessible place, was the sacred sleeping hall. This was where patients went when they were ready, when they had been prepared, physically, mentally, spiritually, for the most important night of their healing journey. The Abaton was a simple building. Stone walls, stone benches along the sides, covered with animal skins, no windows, no decoration. When the doors closed and the lamps were extinguished, it was utterly, completely dark. This was where the magic happened. This was where patients came to sleep and to dream. And the dreams that came to them in the Abaton, the Greeks believed, came from Asklepios himself. But you couldn't just walk in and lie down. Before you could enter the Abaton, you had to be prepared. And that preparation was a process, a careful, deliberate process that could take days. A process that, as we'll discover, was far more scientifically sophisticated than anyone at the time could have known. I want you to imagine yourself arriving at Epidaurus as a patient might have 2,400 years ago. You've been traveling for days, perhaps weeks. You've come from Athens, or from Corinth, or from one of the islands, Kos perhaps, or Crete. You've walked dusty roads, sailed across stretches of open sea. hired a cart for the final stretch through the Argolid countryside. You're tired, you're in pain, and you're carrying something else, a weight that doesn't show on the outside. Hope, desperate, fragile hope that this place, this God, can do what no physician back home could do. The road to Epidaurus climbs gently through olive groves and farmland before entering a forest. And as you enter the forest, the world changes. The heat of the open road gives way to cool shade. The dust settles. The sound of your footsteps softens on the carpet of pine needles. The air fills with a scent that seems to enter your body through every pore. The deep, resinous perfume of Aleppo pine mixed with wild oregano, thyme, and myrtle. You breathe deeply, perhaps for the first time in days, and something in your chest loosens slightly. Not the disease, not yet, but the fear, the tension, the constant clenching that comes from being sick and scared and far from home. As you emerge from the forest, the sanctuary opens before you, and it takes your breath away. The buildings are beautiful, gleaming white marble against the deep green of the surrounding forest. Columns catch the late afternoon sun and seem to glow from within. The paths are clean and well-maintained, lined with low walls and flowering plants. Everywhere there are people, but not the frantic, pushing crowds of the city. These people move slowly, quietly. Some walk alone, others in small groups. Some carry offerings, a chicken, a garland of flowers, a clay figurine. All of them share something in your expression, that mixture of hope and vulnerability that marks the sick. You're met by an attendant, a young man in a simple white robe who speaks gently and asks your name, where you've come from, and what troubles you. He leads you to a guest house, a simple but comfortable room with a bed, a window looking out over the gardens, and a basin of fresh water for washing. And then he tells you to rest, to eat a simple meal, to walk the gardens if you feel like it, to watch the sunset from the hill behind the theater, and to come to the temple in the morning. There is no rush. There will be no rush for as long as you are here. Time at Epidaurus moves differently. It moves at the pace of healing. And that in itself is the first medicine this place offers. You see, in the ancient world, as in our own, the pace of daily life was often relentless. Farmers worked from dawn to dusk. Merchants traveled constantly. Soldiers marched and fought and marched again. Even in peacetime, the business of survival, feeding yourself, housing yourself, protecting your family, consumed nearly all of a person's energy. For many patients, arriving at Epidaurus was the first time they had simply stopped. The first time they had been given permission to do nothing, to eat simple food, to sleep when tired, to walk without destination, to simply exist. And for a body racked by illness, a mind consumed by worry, a spirit exhausted by the effort of keeping going, this was not a small thing. This was, perhaps, the most important thing. Modern medicine has a term for the harmful effects of never stopping. We call it chronic stress, and its toll on the human body is staggering. Elevated cortisol, suppressed immunity, systemic inflammation, disrupted sleep, impaired digestion, accelerated cellular aging. The list goes on and on. At Epidaurus, the first prescription was the antidote to all of this. Rest. True rest. Rest not as the absence of activity, but as a positive, deliberate, supported state. Rest as medicine. And from that foundation of rest, everything else became possible. When a patient arrived at Epidaurus, they were not rushed. There was no urgency, no triage, no emergency room. Instead, there was a slow, deliberate process of preparation that began the moment they stepped through the sanctuary gates. The first thing that happened was a consultation with the priests. These were not ordinary religious figures. The priests of Asklepios were trained healers, men who had studied medicine, herbalism, and the therapeutic arts for years. They would listen carefully to the patient's symptoms, ask questions about their life, their diet, their habits, their emotional state. They were, in many ways, conducting a medical examination, albeit one wrapped in religious language and ritual. Based on this consultation, the priests would prescribe a regimen of preparation. And this is where things get fascinating, because the preparation for the sacred sleep reads to modern eyes almost exactly like a prescription from a contemporary wellness retreat or a sleep clinic. The first step was purification through water. The patient would bathe in the sacred spring, a natural source of cold, clear water that flowed from the hillside near the temple. This wasn't a quick rinse. It was a slow, deliberate immersion. The patient would wade into the cool water, let it flow over their skin, and spend time simply being still in the stream. The water was believed to have purifying properties, and not just symbolically. Many sacred springs in Greece are naturally mineral-rich, containing compounds that can soothe skin conditions, relax muscles, and reduce inflammation. The Greeks may not have understood the chemistry, but they certainly understood the effects. After the bath came dietary restrictions. Patients were told to eat lightly, simple foods, bread, figs, olives. No heavy meals, no wine. Sometimes the prescription was to fast entirely for a day or more. The idea was to lighten the body, to remove the heaviness and sluggishness that comes from overindulgence. We now know that fasting triggers a range of beneficial physiological responses. It reduces inflammation. It improves insulin sensitivity. It promotes a process called autophagy, where the body cleans out damaged cells and generates new ones. The Greeks couldn't have known any of this in scientific terms, but they observed that patients who ate lightly seemed to heal better. And so fasting became part of the protocol. Then came the offerings. Each patient was expected to make a sacrifice to Asklepios. For the wealthy, this might be a goat or a sheep. For the poor, it might be a simple honey cake or a few coins. The offering was placed on the altar of the temple, and prayers were spoken. Now, from a purely religious perspective, this was about appeasing the god. But from a psychological perspective, something more subtle was happening. The act of making an offering, of giving something of value, created commitment. The patient was investing in their own healing. They were making a tangible, physical gesture that said, "I believe this will work. I am dedicating myself to this process." Modern psychology calls this the sunk cost effect and commitment bias. When we invest in something, we become more likely to believe in it, to engage with it, to see it through. The sacrifice at the altar wasn't just religious theater. It was a powerful psychological tool that deepened the patient's engagement with the healing process. After the sacrifice came what might be the most important part of the preparation: time spent in the natural environment of the sanctuary. Patients were encouraged to walk through the sacred groves. These were carefully maintained gardens of pine, cypress, laurel, and olive trees, interspersed with wildflowers and herbs. The paths wound gently through the trees, offering changing views of the mountains, the valley, and the sky. The air was filled with birdsong, the rustle of leaves, and the scent of pine resin and wild herbs. We know today that spending time in nature has profound effects on the human body and mind. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, has been extensively studied, and the results are remarkable. Time spent among trees reduces cortisol levels. It lowers blood pressure. It increases the activity of natural killer cells, a key component of the immune system. And the specific compounds responsible for many of these effects are terpenes, volatile organic compounds released by pine and cypress trees, the exact trees that grew at Epidaurus. 2,000 years before anyone had heard of forest bathing, the Greeks were prescribing it. Patients also attended performances at the theater. They watched dramas, tragedies and comedies that explored the deepest themes of human existence: love, loss, fate, courage, redemption. These performances weren't just entertainment. They were cathartic. The Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote about catharsis, the emotional cleansing that comes from experiencing powerful art. Watching a tragedy allowed the audience to feel their own grief, fear, and sadness in a safe context, to release emotions that might otherwise remain trapped inside. For a sick person carrying the weight of their illness, their fear, their uncertainty about the future, this emotional release was profoundly therapeutic. They exercised in the gymnasium. They soaked in the bathhouses. They rested in the shade. They ate simply and mindfully. And day by day, hour by hour, they felt the tension leaving their bodies, the anxiety loosening its grip, the noise of the outside world fading into silence. And then when the priests judged that the patient was ready, that their body was cleansed, their mind was calm, their spirit was open, they were told, "Tonight, you will enter the abaton. Tonight, you will sleep in the house of the god. And if Asklepios finds you worthy, he will come to you in your dreams." There is a detail about the preparation process at Epidaurus that I find particularly beautiful, and I want to share it with you. Among the prescribed activities during the days of preparation was something the Greeks called peripatein, walking, not exercise walking, not power walking, not walking with any particular destination in mind, just walking, slowly, thoughtfully, through the gardens, along the colonnades, around the circular path of the tholos. The Greeks had a deep appreciation for the relationship between walking and thinking. The philosophical school of Aristotle was called the Peripatetics, literally, the walkers, because Aristotle taught while walking back and forth in the Lyceum. The Stoics were named after the Stoa, the covered walkway where they gathered. Walking was not just transportation. It was a practice, a way of being. For the patients at Epidaurus, walking served multiple purposes. It provided gentle exercise, which improved circulation and helped the body begin its healing process. It exposed them to the natural environment, the pine forests, the gardens, the mountain views, with all the therapeutic benefits we've already discussed. And it gave them time and space for introspection. When you walk slowly, without purpose, your mind begins to wander. Thoughts rise and fall like waves. Memories surface. Emotions emerge. The constant narrative of daily life, the endless mental chatter about what needs to be done, what might go wrong, what you should have said, begins to quiet down. Modern psychology calls this default mode network activation, a state in which the brain shifts from focused, task-oriented thinking to a more open, reflective mode. It's the state in which creative insights occur. in which emotional processing happens, in which the mind sorts through unresolved problems and begins to find resolution. The patients at Epidaurus, walking slowly through beautiful gardens, were entering this state naturally. And in doing so, they were beginning the psychological healing process even before they entered the abaton. Another element of the preparation that deserves attention is the music. Epidaurus had a rich musical culture. Hymns were sung to Asklepios at dawn and dusk. Flutes and lyres provided gentle background music in the gardens and bathhouses. The theater performances included musical accompaniment. The Greeks believed that music had the power to heal. The legend of Orpheus, the musician whose playing could charm animals, move trees, and even convince the god of the underworld to release a soul from death, reflected a deep cultural understanding of music's power over the body and mind. We now have scientific confirmation of what the Greeks intuited. Music therapy is an established clinical practice used in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and mental health facilities worldwide. Listening to slow, calming music reduces cortisol levels, lowers heart rate and blood pressure, decreases anxiety, and can even reduce the perception of pain. Rhythmic music can entrain brain waves, guiding the brain towards states associated with relaxation and sleep. At Epidaurus, the patients were immersed in a carefully curated soundscape. Natural sounds of the forest, gentle music, the quiet murmur of water, the distant applause of the theater audience. Every sound was conducive to calm. Nothing was jarring, startling, or aggressive. Compare this to the sound environment of a modern hospital. Beeping monitors, overhead announcements, mechanical ventilation, rolling carts, closing doors, the constant hum of fluorescent lighting. It's no wonder that sleep deprivation is one of the most common complaints among hospital patients. The Greeks understood what modern hospital designers are only now beginning to accept, that the sonic environment of a healing space matters enormously. There was also the matter of scent. The sanctuary at Epidaurus was rich with aromatic plants: rosemary, lavender, myrtle, laurel, thyme, sage. The incense burned at the temple altar. Frankincense and myrrh filled the air with resinous, calming fragrances. The pine forests released their terpenes continuously. Aromatherapy as a formal practice is a relatively modern concept, but the principle behind it, that inhaled aromatic compounds can affect mood, stress levels, and physiological function, is well supported by research. Lavender, for example, has been shown to reduce anxiety and improve sleep quality. Frankincense has anti-inflammatory and anxiolytic properties. Rosemary enhances cognitive function. The patients at Epidaurus were breathing in a complex cocktail of therapeutic aromas throughout their stay. Not from bottles or diffusers, but from the living landscape around them. Every element of the preparation, the bathing, the fasting, the walking, the music, the aromas, the social connection, the theatrical catharsis, the offerings, the prayers, worked together to create a state of profound readiness. By the time the patient lay down in the abaton, they were not just physically clean and rested. They were psychologically open, emotionally unburdened, spiritually receptive. They were, in the language of modern psychology, in a state of maximum therapeutic readiness. And that state, more than any single intervention, was perhaps the most important factor in whatever healing occurred during the night that followed. Now it grows quiet. The sun has set behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and gold before fading into darkness. The stars emerge, one by one, then all at once, a vast brilliant canopy stretching from horizon to horizon. There is no light pollution here, no glow from distant cities, just stars, more stars than you can imagine, and the soft silver light of the moon. The patient is led to the abaton. They walk slowly through the darkening sanctuary, past the temple, past the tholos, past the gardens that now breathe softly in the night air. The path is lit by a few oil lamps, their flames flickering gently in the breeze. The patient's bare feet touch cool stone, then warm earth, then stone again. At the entrance to the abaton, a priest waits. He speaks quietly. He reminds the patient of what they are here to do. He tells them to open their heart to Asklepios, to let go of fear, to trust in the process, to simply sleep. The patient enters. The abaton is dim. A few oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Along both sides of the long, narrow hall, stone benches are covered with animal skins, usually the hides of sacrificed rams, still soft, still warm with the memory of life. Other patients are already lying down. Some are still. Some shift slightly, adjusting their positions. But no one speaks. The patient chooses a bench. They lie down on the ram's fleece, feeling the rough wool against their skin. The stone beneath is cool but not cold. The warmth of the day still lingers in it. They pull a light linen cloth over themselves. And then the priests begin to extinguish the lamps. One by one, the small flames disappear. The shadows deepen. The darkness grows until there is nothing. Complete, absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that modern humans almost never experience. The kind of darkness where you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. Where the only senses that remain are touch and hearing and smell. What you hear is this. Silence. Deep, profound silence. Broken only by the distant chirping of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the faintest whisper of wind through the pine trees outside. And perhaps, if you listen very carefully, the soft, dry sound of something moving across the stone floor. The sacred snakes. Asklepios kept snakes in his temples. Non-venomous snakes, likely the Asklepian snake, a species that still exists in southern Europe today. These snakes were allowed to roam freely through the abaton at night. They were considered sacred agents of the god, living instruments of healing. The patient lies in the darkness, knowing this, knowing that somewhere in the room, the snakes are moving, and they wait. This state, this deliberate, sacred waiting in the dark, is what the Greeks called enkoimesis. It comes from the word koimen, meaning to put to sleep. But it was more than ordinary sleep. It was an incubation, a spiritual state between waking and dreaming, between the human world and the divine. The patient was expected to enter a sleep in which Asklepios would appear. The god might come in the form of a man, tall, bearded, kind-eyed, carrying his staff with the serpent coiled around it. He might appear as a voice, speaking directly into the dreamer's mind. He might come as a sensation, a warmth spreading through the body, a pressure lifting from the chest, a pain dissolving into nothing. Sometimes patients reported that they felt the snakes crawling over their bodies during the night. They felt the cool, smooth scales moving across their skin, pausing at the sight of their illness, their injury, their pain. They felt the snakes' tongues flickering against their flesh. And they believed, truly deeply believed, that the snakes were channeling the healing power of Asklepios directly into their bodies. Others described more dramatic experiences. They felt the god's hands on their body. They felt him cutting them open, reaching inside, removing the source of their disease, and then closing them up again, all without pain, all while they floated in a state between sleep and waking. They awoke feeling different, changed, healed, and some patients simply slept, deeply, profoundly, peacefully. They had no visions, no dramatic dreams, but they woke up feeling rested in a way they hadn't felt in months, perhaps years. The pain was less, the anxiety was quieter, the body felt lighter, more alive. Was any of this real? Did the god actually visit these patients in the night? That depends on what you mean by real. The experiences were real. The patients genuinely felt them, genuinely believed them, and in many cases, genuinely improved afterward. Whether the cause was divine intervention or something else entirely, well, we'll explore that later. For now, let's stay in the darkness of the Abaton for a little while longer. Let the silence settle around us. Let the night do its work, because there is something undeniably powerful about lying in perfect darkness in a sacred place after days of preparation, with the deep belief that healing is about to come. Something that transcends explanation. Something that even modern science, with all its tools and knowledge, is still struggling to fully understand. The ancient Greeks knew this. They built an entire medical system around it, and for hundreds of years, it worked. Let me slow down here. Let me give this moment the space it deserves. Because the enkoimesis, the sacred sleep in the Abaton, was the culmination of everything. Every bath, every prayer, every walk through the pine forest, every hour of fasting and preparation. It all led here, to this dark room, to this moment of surrender. And I want you to understand what it felt like. Not just what happened, but what it felt like from the inside. Because the experience of the patient is the key to understanding why this worked. Imagine that you have been ill for a long time, months, perhaps years. You've tried everything: herbs, physicians, prayers at your local shrine. Nothing has worked. The pain persists, the weakness persists, the fear persists. And then you heard about Epidaurus. A friend told you, or a traveling merchant, or you saw a votive tablet in a temple. A small clay or bronze tablet that said, "I was blind, and Asklepios gave me my sight." Or, "I was lame, and the god made me walk." So you made the journey, a long journey, full of uncertainty. What if it doesn't work? What if the god doesn't come? What if you've traveled all this way for nothing? But then you arrived, and the place was beautiful, and the priests were kind, and the air smelled of pine and sea salt, and for the first time in a long time, you felt held, cared for, not rushed, not dismissed, not treated as just another case. The priests listened to you. They heard your story. They took your suffering seriously. Over the days of preparation, something shifted inside you. The constant vigilance, the watchfulness that comes from being sick in an uncertain world, began to ease. Your body remembered what it felt like to relax. Your mind, so used to racing through lists of worries, began to slow down. And now you're here, in the Abaton, in the dark. The ram's fleece beneath you is surprisingly soft. The stone bench has been warmed by the day's sun and holds you like a firm hand. The air is cool but not cold. And the silence is extraordinary. Not the empty silence of an unused room, but the living silence of a sacred space. A silence that feels full, that feels watchful, that feels somehow kind. Your breathing slows, your muscles soften. The pain, which has been your constant companion for so long that you've almost forgotten what it's like to be without it. The pain doesn't disappear, but it recedes. It moves to the edges of your awareness. It becomes quieter, less insistent, and in the space that opens up, in the space where the pain used to be, something else arrives. A warmth, a heaviness. Not the heaviness of illness, but the heaviness of deep, approaching sleep. The kind of heaviness that pulls you gently downward, like sinking into warm water. You let go. You have to. The darkness is so complete, and the silence so deep, and your body so tired from the days of preparation that there is nothing left to hold on to. No light to focus on, no sound to analyze, no task to complete. Just darkness and warmth, and the smell of animal skin and stone and distant pine. And somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, you cross a threshold. You're no longer quite awake. You're no longer quite asleep. You're in a place between, a place the Greeks considered sacred, a liminal space, a threshold between the human world and the divine. This is the space where dreams live. And in the Greek understanding, this was the space where the gods could reach you, where the veil between worlds was thinnest, where Asklepios himself could step through and lay his healing hands upon your body. Modern neuroscience has a name for this state, too. We call it the hypnagogic state, the transitional period between wakefulness and sleep. It's a state characterized by vivid imagery, heightened suggestibility, unusual sensory experiences, and a loosening of the normal boundaries between conscious and unconscious thought. In the hypnagogic state, people often experience visual hallucinations, flashes of light, geometric patterns, faces, landscapes. They hear sounds that aren't there, voices, music, their own name being called. They feel physical sensations, the feeling of falling, of floating, of being touched. For a patient lying in the abaton, primed by days of ritual preparation, deeply believing in the power of the god, in a state of maximum suggestibility and sensory deprivation, the hypnagogic state would have been extraordinarily vivid, extraordinarily powerful, indistinguishable in that moment from a genuine divine visitation. The snakes, too, deserve a closer look. The Asklepian snake, Zamenis longissimus, is a large non-venomous serpent that can grow to nearly 2 meters in length. It's a gentle animal, not aggressive toward humans. It moves slowly and silently, and it's attracted to warmth. Imagine lying in the dark, in the hypnagogic state, and feeling something smooth and cool and dry moving across your arm, moving slowly, deliberately, pausing at your hand, your wrist, the crook of your elbow. You can't see it. You can only feel it. And you know, you've been told, that these are the sacred serpents of Asklepios, that their touch carries the god's healing power. In that moment, the boundary between belief and reality dissolves completely. The snake's touch becomes the god's touch. The dream becomes a visitation. The hope becomes a certainty. And the body responds, not because of magic, because of something far more powerful, the absolute, total, bone-deep conviction that healing is happening right now, in this very moment, in this very place. That conviction, that belief, triggers cascades of neurochemical responses. Endorphins flood the system, reducing pain. Oxytocin promotes a feeling of safety and connection. The parasympathetic nervous system deepens its hold, slowing the heart, relaxing the muscles, promoting tissue repair. The immune system freed from the suppressive effects of chronic stress, surges into action, and the patient sleeps. Truly deeply, profoundly sleeps. Perhaps for the first time in months, perhaps for the first time in years. A sleep so deep and so complete that it feels upon waking like emerging from another world, which, in a way, it was. When morning came to Epidaurus and the first light crept through the doorway of the abaton, the patients would rise from their stone benches and step back into the world. But their journey wasn't quite over. The first thing they did was find a priest, and they told him their dreams. This was perhaps the most important part of the entire process, the dream interpretation. The priests of Asklepios were trained in the art of reading dreams, of finding meaning in the symbols, sensations, and narratives that had visited the patient during the night. They would listen carefully, ask questions, and then offer an interpretation that typically included specific medical advice. If the patient dreamed of a river, it might mean they needed more water in their diet. If they dreamed of fire, perhaps they had an excess of heat in their body, a fever that needed cooling. If they dreamed of Asklepios touching a specific part of their body, that was where the treatment should focus. This sounds mystical, and it was, in part. But it also bears a striking resemblance to what we now call talk therapy. The patient was describing their inner world, their fears, their hopes, their physical sensations, to a trained listener who then helped them make sense of it all. The process of articulating your experience, having it received without judgment, and being given a framework for understanding it, that is, at its core, what therapy does. But we don't have to rely on interpretation or speculation about what happened at Epidaurus, because the most extraordinary thing about this sanctuary is that we have evidence, physical, tangible evidence, written in stone. In the ruins of Epidaurus, archaeologists discovered 3 large marble tablets known as the Iamata, the healings. Dated to approximately 350 BC, these tablets record over 70 individual case histories, real patients, real names, real complaints, and real outcomes. Let me share some of them with you. There was a man named Herman of Thassos. Herman was blind. He had lost his sight, and no physician had been able to help him. He traveled to Epidaurus, went through the preparation rituals, and slept in the abaton. During the night, he dreamed that Asklepios appeared before him and touched his eyes. When he awoke the next morning, the tablet tells us he could see. He walked out of the abaton, and the first thing he saw were the votive tablets on the temple walls, the thank you offerings left by other healed patients. There was a woman named Ambrosia of Athens who was blind in one eye. She came to Epidaurus skeptical. She even mocked the idea that dreams could heal, pointing at the votive tablets and saying it was impossible that the lame and the blind could be cured simply by sleeping in a temple. But she went through the process anyway. And in her dream, Asklepios appeared and told her that he would heal her. But as payment for her skepticism, she would have to dedicate a silver pig to the temple. When she awoke, her eye was healed. And she did indeed dedicate a silver pig. There was a man from Torone who had leeches in his body, likely intestinal parasites. In his dream, Asklepios cut open his chest, removed the leeches, stitched him back up, and placed the parasites in his hands. When he woke up, he was holding something in his clenched fists, and his symptoms were gone. A woman who had suffered from headaches for 5 years dreamed that Asklepios opened her skull, removed a large serpent, and put her head back together. She woke up, headache-free. A man with a stone in his bladder, what we would call kidney or bladder stones, dreamed that Asklepios appeared and asked him, "What would you give me if I heal you?" The man promised 10 dice made of gold. Asklepios laughed and said he would accept the payment. During the dream, the god cut into the man's belly and removed the stone. When the man woke, he found the stone lying on the ground beside him. Now, some of these stories are clearly miraculous, supernatural narratives that were probably embellished to attract more patients. They're marketing, essentially. The marble tablets were displayed prominently in the sanctuary, where every new arrival could read them. They served the same function as 5-star reviews on a modern medical website. But some of the cases are surprisingly realistic. The descriptions of surgery, the removal of foreign objects, the draining of abscesses, the setting of dislocated joints are clinically plausible. Many researchers believe that the priests of Asklepios actually performed minor surgical procedures on patients who were in deep sleep, or perhaps under the influence of sedative herbs. The patients, upon waking, attributed the procedure to the god's hands rather than the priests. And here's what the tablets don't tell us: the failures. The patients who slept in the abaton and woke up no better than before. The diseases that no amount of sacred sleep could cure. Like any good advertisement, the Ayamata show only the success stories. But even accounting for exaggeration and selective reporting, the sheer volume of cases, and the fact that the sanctuary operated successfully for hundreds of years, attracting patients from across the Mediterranean world, tells us that something genuinely effective was happening at Epidaurus. Something that went far beyond superstition. Something that modern science can actually explain. The marble tablets of Epidaurus, the Ayamata, are remarkable documents, but they're not the only evidence we have of what happened in the Asklepios. Throughout the ancient world, grateful patients left votive offerings at the temples, small sculptures or relief carvings depicting the body part that had been healed. If your leg was cured, you might dedicate a clay or marble model of a leg. If your eyes were healed, you might leave a pair of carved eyes. If a tumor was removed, you might commission a sculpture showing the affected area. Archaeologists have found thousands of these votives at various Asklepios. They provide a fascinating epidemiological record, a kind of ancient patient survey. The most commonly represented body parts are eyes, limbs, hands, feet, and torsos. This suggests that the most common conditions treated at the temples were blindness or vision problems, mobility issues, chronic pain, and abdominal or chest complaints. Interestingly, there are also many votives depicting breasts and wombs, suggesting that women sought treatment for reproductive and gynecological conditions. And there are votives showing ears, heads, and even individual organs, suggesting that the range of conditions treated was remarkably broad. Some votives are anatomically quite accurate, detailed enough that modern physicians can make tentative diagnoses. One votive from the Asklepios at Corinth, for example, shows a chest with what appears to be a surgical incision. Another from Epidaurus shows a hand with what looks like a ganglion cyst. These objects give us a window into the daily reality of the Asklepios. They show us that these were not places for the occasional miraculous cure. They were busy, functioning medical institutions, treating a wide range of conditions on a regular basis. They were staffed by experienced practitioners who, whatever their religious beliefs, had accumulated significant practical knowledge about healing. The combination of the Iamata tablets and the votive offerings paints a picture of institutions that were, in many ways, surprisingly modern. They had patient records. They had outcome tracking. They had specialized treatment protocols. They had a culture of continuous improvement. The tablets were updated regularly, and the therapeutic practices evolved over the centuries. Of course, they also had limitations. There was no germ theory, no understanding of antibiotics, no concept of sterile surgical technique. Many conditions that we can cure easily today would have been hopeless at Epidaurus. And the religious framework meant that failures could always be attributed to the patient's lack of faith rather than to the limitations of the treatment. A convenient escape clause that prevented the kind of rigorous self-criticism that drives modern medical progress. But within their limitations, the Asklepios achieved something remarkable. They took the most complex, most vulnerable, most human experience, being sick and afraid, and they addressed it with a combination of practical medicine, psychological support, spiritual care, and environmental design that remains in many ways unmatched. And they did it for 1,000 years, across 300 temples, serving millions of patients. That kind of longevity doesn't happen by accident. Something real was happening in those temples, something that worked. So what was really happening at Epidaurus? How do we explain the healings, the genuine improvements that so many patients experienced, without invoking divine intervention? The answer is that the Asklepios of Epidaurus was, whether intentionally or not, one of the most brilliantly designed therapeutic environments in human history. It combined multiple healing mechanisms that modern science has validated, and it combined them in a way that amplified their effects far beyond what any single treatment could achieve. Let's go through them, one by one. The first and perhaps most powerful mechanism is what we now call the placebo effect. And I want to be very careful here, because the placebo effect is often dismissed as just a trick of the mind. It's not. It's one of the most well-documented phenomena in all of medicine. When a person genuinely believes that a treatment will work, when they trust the healer, when they feel cared for, when they commit to the process, measurable physical changes occur in their body. Pain decreases, inflammation reduces, the immune system becomes more active. Neurotransmitters like endorphins and dopamine are released. Blood pressure normalizes. Healing accelerates. These aren't imaginary improvements. They can be measured with blood tests, brain scans, and physiological monitors. The placebo effect is real. Physical medicine, delivered not by a pill or a scalpel, but by belief. And the patients at Epidaurus believed. They believed profoundly. They had traveled long distances, often in pain, specifically to seek the help of a god they had worshipped their entire lives. They had gone through days of preparation, designed to deepen their commitment and their faith. They were surrounded by marble tablets describing miracle cures. They were sleeping in a place they considered sacred. The conditions for a maximally powerful placebo effect were almost perfectly engineered. The second mechanism is stress reduction, specifically the lowering of cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Many of the patients who came to Epidaurus were not just physically ill. They were stressed, anxious, exhausted. They came from cities that were noisy, crowded, and unsanitary. They worried about their families, their livelihoods, their futures. Chronic stress, as we now understand, is one of the most destructive forces in human health. It suppresses the immune system, promotes inflammation, disrupts sleep, impairs digestion, and accelerates aging. What happened when these patients arrived at Epidaurus? Everything changed. The noise stopped. The crowding stopped. The demands stopped. Instead, they found themselves in a beautiful, peaceful valley, surrounded by nature, with nothing to do but bathe, walk, rest, and prepare for healing. For many of them, it may have been the first time in months or years that they had truly relaxed. The physiological effects of this kind of deep relaxation are well documented. Cortisol drops, blood pressure normalizes, heart rate slows, the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode, takes over from the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight mode. Inflammation decreases, immune function improves. The body, freed from the constant burden of stress, begins to heal itself. The third mechanism is what we would now call sleep hygiene, the practice of creating optimal conditions for restorative sleep. Think about the Abaton: complete darkness, complete silence, a cool, consistent temperature, a regular sleep-wake schedule, no stimulants, no heavy meals before bed, light exercise during the day, relaxation practices in the evening. Every single one of these factors is recommended by modern sleep medicine. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the National Sleep Foundation, and sleep researchers around the world all advocate for exactly these conditions. Darkness triggers the release of melatonin. Silence allows the brain to transition smoothly through sleep stages. Cool temperatures promote deep sleep. Regular schedules synchronize the circadian rhythm. The Greeks didn't know about melatonin or circadian rhythms, but they created, through intuition and observation, an almost perfect sleep environment. And for patients who had been struggling with insomnia or disrupted sleep, which given the stress and discomfort of their illnesses was probably many of them, this alone could have been transformative. The fourth mechanism is something that has only recently begun to receive the scientific attention it deserves: the therapeutic power of dreams and dream interpretation as a form of psychotherapy. When the patients spoke to the priests each morning about their dreams, they weren't just reporting random images. They were engaging in a structured, therapeutic conversation. They were articulating their inner experiences. They were exploring their fears and hopes. They were receiving an interpretation that helped them make sense of their suffering and gave them a sense of agency and direction. This is, at its core, what talk therapy does. The content was different. The Greeks framed it in terms of divine messages, while modern therapists frame it in terms of psychology. But the process was remarkably similar. A distressed person speaks to a trained listener about their inner world, and through the conversation, finds relief. Modern research on dream therapy and dream incubation supports the idea that directed dreaming can help process trauma, reduce anxiety, and promote emotional healing. And the ritual context of Epidaurus, the sacred setting, the authority of the priests, the community of fellow patients, would have amplified these effects considerably. The fifth mechanism is the environment itself, specifically the forest. Epidaurus sits in a valley surrounded by dense pine forests. We now know, thanks to decades of research, that pine forests are rich in compounds called terpenes, volatile organic molecules that have measurable effects on the human body. Alpha-pinene, The primary terpene in pine resin has been shown to reduce anxiety, lower cortisol, and enhance immune function. Beta-pinene has anti-inflammatory properties. Limonene improves mood. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, which involves simply spending time in a forest environment, has been extensively studied. Participants show reduced cortisol, lower blood pressure, improved mood, and enhanced natural killer cell activity after just a few hours among trees. The patients at Epidaurus spent days walking through pine forests. They breathed in terpene-rich air constantly. They literally bathed in the healing chemistry of the trees. 2,000 years before anyone had heard of forest bathing, the Greeks were prescribing exactly that. And the sixth mechanism, perhaps the most overlooked of all, is community. The patients at Epidaurus were not alone. They were surrounded by others who were going through the same experience. They shared meals. They walked the gardens together. They attended theater performances side by side. They slept in the same hall. This communal aspect of healing is profoundly important. Loneliness and social isolation are now recognized as major risk factors for poor health, comparable in terms of mortality risk to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Conversely, feeling connected, feeling supported, feeling that you belong to a community, these things measurably improve health outcomes. At Epidaurus, sick people who may have felt isolated by their conditions were suddenly part of a community united by a shared hope for healing, a community where their suffering was acknowledged, understood, and taken seriously. Now, here's what makes all of this truly remarkable. Each of these mechanisms, placebo, stress reduction, sleep optimization, psychotherapy, forest medicine, community, is effective on its own. But at Epidaurus, they were all happening simultaneously. The effects didn't just add up, they multiplied. They reinforced each other. The belief made the relaxation deeper. The relaxation made the sleep better. The better sleep made the dreams more vivid. The dreams made the therapy more powerful. And the whole experience, shared within a supportive community in a beautiful natural setting, created a healing environment of extraordinary potency. The priests of Asklepios didn't understand any of this in scientific terms. They understood it in religious terms. They believed the god was healing people. But what they created, through centuries of careful observation and refinement, was something that modern integrative medicine is only now beginning to rediscover. The idea that healing isn't just about the specific treatment. It's about the whole person, the whole environment, the whole experience. There is an island in the eastern Aegean Sea called Kos. It's a small island. You can drive across it in about an hour. But it holds a very large place in the history of human civilization. Because on this island, around 460 BC, a boy was born who would change medicine forever. His name was Hippocrates. We call him the father of medicine, and his legacy, the Hippocratic Oath, the concept of clinical observation, the idea that disease has natural causes rather than supernatural ones, is the foundation on which all of modern medicine is built. But here's what many people don't know. Hippocrates grew up in the shadow of an Asklepios. The island of Kos had one of the largest and most important healing temples in the Greek world. And it's very likely that the young Hippocrates studied there, that he learned the arts of healing not in a university or a laboratory, but in a temple dedicated to Asklepios. This matters, because when you look at what Hippocrates taught, you can see the fingerprints of the Asklepios all over it. Hippocrates taught that the physician should treat the whole patient, not just the disease. That diet, exercise, environment, and emotional state all mattered. That the body had a natural capacity to heal itself, and the physician's job was to create the conditions for that healing to occur. Sound familiar? These are exactly the principles that the Asklepios had been practicing for generations. Hippocrates took the practical wisdom of the healing temples, the dietary protocols, the emphasis on environment, the holistic approach to the patient, and stripped away the religious framework. He replaced the gods with observation. He replaced ritual with method. He replaced faith with logic. But the core insight remained the same. Healing is not just about fighting disease. It's about nurturing health. It's about creating the right conditions for the body and mind to restore themselves. And this insight, born in the sleep temples of ancient Greece, has echoed through the centuries in ways we don't always recognize. Consider the idea of a hospital, a place where sick people go to be cared for under professional supervision, a place with beds and trained staff and specific protocols for treatment. That's an Asklepios. That's what they were, the first hospitals. Consider the modern understanding that a patient's environment affects their recovery. That hospital design matters. That natural light, views of nature, quiet surroundings, and comfortable spaces can measurably improve healing outcomes. This is an entire field of modern research called evidence-based design. And its fundamental insight that the space around us affects our health was understood at Epidaurus over 2,000 years ago. Consider the growing field of sleep medicine. The recognition that sleep is not just rest, but an active healing process during which the body repairs tissues, consolidates memories, processes emotions, and fights disease. The idea that optimizing sleep is one of the most powerful things you can do for your health. The Asklepios were, in essence, the world's first sleep clinics. Consider the rise of integrative medicine, the approach that combines conventional treatments with practices like meditation, yoga, nature therapy, art therapy, and mindfulness. The idea that healing works best when it addresses the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. This is the philosophy of the Asklepios, translated into modern language. And consider something even more personal. Consider what you're doing right now. You're lying in the dark or in dim light, listening to a calm voice telling you a story. A story designed to be interesting enough to engage your mind, but soothing enough to let you drift towards sleep. A story about a world far away, in a time long past, where the problems of daily life can't reach you. In a way, this video is a very small, very humble echo of what happened in the Abaton at Epidaurus. A voice in the darkness. A story that leads you gently towards sleep. The hope that when you wake up, you'll feel a little better than you did before. Some things, it turns out, don't change. The technology changes, the language changes, the explanations change. But the human need for rest, for stories, for comfort in the dark, that remains exactly the same. The Asklepios eventually fell into decline. As Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, the old pagan temples were gradually abandoned or repurposed. The last known active Asklepios was at Epidaurus, and it continued to function until roughly the 5th century AD, meaning it operated for nearly 1,000 years. 1,000 years of patients sleeping in the Abaton, seeking healing through dreams. But the ideas didn't die. They couldn't. They were too deeply true. They simply changed form. Monastic healing gardens in medieval Europe. The spa towns of the 18th and 19th centuries. The sanatorium movement of the early 20th century. The wellness retreats and sleep clinics of today. Each one is a descendant, however distant, of those Greek temples by the sea, and the symbol endures. That simple image, a snake coiled around a staff, still hangs on every hospital, every ambulance, every medical school in the world. A silent reminder that medicine began not with a pill or a procedure, but with a prayer, a dream, and a night of sacred sleep. Let me tell you one more thing about Hippocrates, because it speaks to the thread that connects the ancient world to our own. Hippocrates is famous for many things. The oath that bears his name. The concept that doctors should first do no harm. The idea that disease has natural causes. But one of his most important and least discussed contributions was his understanding of sleep. Hippocrates wrote extensively about sleep and its relationship to health. He observed that sleep patterns changed when people were ill. He noted that certain sleeping positions could indicate specific diseases. He believed that dreams could provide diagnostic information, not because they were messages from the gods, but because they reflected the state of the body. In one remarkable passage, Hippocrates wrote that if a person dreams of rivers and floods, it suggests an excess of blood. If they dream of fire and heat, it suggests an excess of bile. If they dream of snow and ice, it suggests an excess of phlegm. He was wrong about the specific correspondences, but the underlying principle that dreams reflect our physical and psychological state has been validated by modern sleep research. And he made another observation that still rings true today. He noted that people who sleep well tend to recover faster from illness. That sleep deprivation makes disease worse. That one of the most important things a physician can do for a sick patient is to help them sleep. This was revolutionary for its time. Medicine without gods, without rituals, without sacred snakes, just careful observation and practical advice. And yet, in another sense, it was nothing new at all. It was simply the wisdom of the Asklepios, translated from the language of religion into the language of science. And this translation continues today. Every time a sleep researcher identifies a new mechanism by which sleep promotes healing, they are, in a sense, confirming what the priests of Epidaurus knew, that the night is not empty, that the darkness is not wasted, that in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, the body is doing its most important work. Let me leave you with one final thought as this story draws to its close. We live in a world that values wakefulness, that celebrates productivity, that treats sleep as a necessary evil, something to be minimized, optimized, hacked. We have alarm clocks that jolt us awake, screens that keep us up, and a culture that admires people who claim to need only 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. The ancient Greeks would have thought this was madness. They understood that sleep was not the absence of life. It was life's deepest expression. The time when the body rebuilt itself. The time when the mind processed its experiences. The time when the barriers between the conscious and the unconscious fell away and something deeper, something wiser, could emerge. They built temples to honor this understanding. They created rituals to facilitate it. They trained priests to interpret its messages. And they healed people, genuinely, measurably healed people, by doing something that seems almost absurdly simple, by giving them a beautiful, peaceful place to sleep. 2,500 years later, we have MRI machines and gene therapy and robotic surgery. We can see inside the living brain. We can sequence the human genome. We can transplant organs from one body to another. But we still can't explain exactly why sleep heals. We still can't replicate the profound rest that comes from feeling truly safe, truly cared for, truly at peace. We still can't improve upon the basic prescription that the priests of Epidaurus offered to their patients more than 2 millennia ago. Rest, let go, trust the night, and let sleep do what it was always meant to do. And so our journey through the sleep temples of the ancient world comes to an end. Perhaps there's something comforting in knowing that the struggle to sleep is as old as civilization itself. That for thousands of years, human beings have lain awake in the darkness, hoping for rest. Kings and farmers, philosophers and soldiers, poets and merchants, all of them, at one time or another, staring into the same darkness you might be staring into right now. But they found a way. They built beautiful places. They created rituals of calm. They told each other stories. And they trusted that sleep, when it came, would bring not just rest, but renewal. Not just silence, but healing. You don't need a marble temple. You don't need a sacred spring or a pine forest or a priest to interpret your dreams. You just need this: a quiet moment, a comfortable place, a willingness to let go of the day and trust the night. The ancient Greeks believed that Asklepios watched over the sleeping, that somewhere in the space between waking and dreaming, healing was always possible. Maybe they were right. Close your eyes. Let the world grow quiet, and let the oldest medicine in the world do its work. Good night. The night sky above ancient Greece was the same sky that hangs above you now. The same stars, the same moon, the same slow turning of the earth through space. Somewhere right now, the ruins of Epidaurus stand in their quiet valley. The marble has crumbled, the columns have fallen, the abaton is open to the sky. Wild flowers grow between the stones. Lizards bask on what were once the beds of the sick. And the pine trees, the descendants of the very trees that sheltered patients 2,000 years ago, still fill the air with their healing scent. But if you could stand there, late at night, when the tourists have gone and the valley is silent, you might feel something, a kind of presence. Not a god, perhaps, not in the literal sense, but something more subtle. The accumulated weight of all those nights, all those prayers, all those desperate, hopeful people who lay down in the darkness and waited for healing to come. Hundreds of thousands of them, over centuries, all sharing the same simple, profound wish. Let me rest. Let me heal. Let me wake up tomorrow and feel a little less broken than I do right now. You share that wish tonight, and that connection, across all those centuries, across all that distance, is itself a kind of comfort. You are not alone in your wakefulness. You have never been alone. The world sleeps and wakes, sleeps and wakes. It has been doing so since before the first temple was built, before the first prayer was spoken, before the first dream was dreamed. And it will continue long after the last of us has closed our eyes for the final time. But tonight is not about finality. Tonight is about rest, about letting the weight of the day settle like sediment to the bottom of a still pool, about letting your thoughts slow and soften and drift like clouds across a moonlit sky. The ancient Greeks had a beautiful word for the moment just before sleep. Oneros, the dream gate. The threshold you cross when consciousness gives way to something deeper, something older, something wiser than your waking mind. You're approaching that gate now. You can feel it, the heaviness in your limbs, the softening of your thoughts, the way the sounds around you seem to recede, growing fainter and fainter, like footsteps walking away down a long corridor. Let them go. Let everything go. The worries, the plans, the unfinished thoughts. They'll be there tomorrow. They always are. But right now, in this moment, there is only this, the darkness and the silence, and the oldest medicine in the world, doing what it has always done. Sleep well, dream well, and may you wake refreshed. Good night.